Hello, everyone. We are going to all introduce ourselves, Melody, Laura, and myself now. But we would love to hear in the chat from you who you are, what you do, and why you've joined us today. That would be great. It's great to see lots of people here, some people that we've worked with before, and some new people. Old and new friends are all welcome. So that's it's wonderful to see everyone. So thank you for coming. My name is Emma Bayne. I'm a principal consultant at Strive Higher, and I'll just give you a little bit of background about who I am, and then I'll hand over to Laura and Melody to do the same about themselves as well. My background is in leading transformation and change, both across the sector and in the UK government, both in the digital space and kind of more broadly as well. I'm a former chief technology officer, and I've worked in a range of roles across the spectrum of the different functions in HE. My biggest passion or deep passions is around the power of collaboration, empowerment, and empathy, and how you can design this into every aspect of HE. And I'm very excited about the opportunities that AI offers, particularly when applied through this lens, because there obviously are kind of lots of emerging challenges with AI as well that it's interesting to kind of think about. So in terms of Strive Higher, who myself and Laura and Melody all work for, we are a higher education consultancy. We work in partnership with higher education institutions, and our work is all about collaboration, listening, and supporting universities to use all their wonderful experience and knowledge to make positive change happen and to shape their future. And that's what we're here for. So now, Laura Jackson, do you want to explain who you are?
Thanks, Emma. Hi, everyone. I'm Laura Jackson. I'm also principal consultant at Strive Higher. I've a fairly similar background to Emma in terms of having worked across both local government and a range of higher education institutions. But my focus is and always has been data and a love of data. And actually, I recognise not just Sophie, but a few others who've joined us on our Confident Data Partners programme that we've been running with the OHR for the last couple of years now. The roles that I've had have always really been focused on the power of data and what it can do in different circumstances. So, be that strategic planning, be it working in a student registry, actually alongside Melody many years ago, at the University of Leicester, being data analytics, or just kind of working across a range of functions to see what data can actually do to make a difference. I'm particularly interested in the way that data systems and AI all work together or not to actually make a real difference in the things that we're doing, both in transformation and as kind of business as usual as part of our day-to-day activity. So really looking forward to this conversation. Melody.
Good afternoon, everyone. I see some familiar faces here. It's lovely to see you all. Lovely to meet those of you that I haven't met before. So I'm Melody. I work with Strive Higher as an associate consultant, and my background really is all HE. So I often joke that I have spent my entire life in education. I spent the first 5 years of my life on campus at Cranfield, where my dad studied, went through my education, came out of education, went straight to the AU and worked there. So I've literally just spent all of my time in and around mostly HE. So for the last sort of decade or so, I have worked with a number of big student information system vendors, and also in the last 4 or 5 years, really focused in on the use of AI and robotics to support HE, most in the operational space, and spent quite a few years as a CCO of an AI and automation startup that focused specifically on providing solutions to the HE sector. When I'm not working with Strive Higher on projects, the other half of my professional life, I work over at TechnologyOne as a product director for the student product. So as you can imagine, we're all having some very interesting conversations, both internally and externally, about how we use AI and the benefits and some of the pitfalls and concerns that I think we're all trying to navigate. So I'm really looking forward to today's conversation, and I can see that there's lots of interest in the AI space. So hopefully lots of questions that we can try and mull over together as we navigate the next hour. I'm going to hand over back to Emma.
Thank you very much, lovely ladies. So, yes, thank you for all of your comments in the chat as well. Really interesting and useful to know why you're all here. So, what we're going to do now is I'm going to talk a bit about the kind of digital process and systems side of stuff. Laura's going to talk a bit about data, and Melody's going to talk a bit about kind of AI. Obviously, they're all are massively intertwined and interlinked. And so while we're talking, if you have any questions, if you drop them in the chat, and then once we finish that portion of it, we'll just open the kind of floor to just general questions. If you've had any experiences you want to share based on the things we talk about, any kind of burning opinions or things you want to discuss, this is very much a kind of open conversation. So, we would really love to get your feedback and get involved in this. And then at the end, we're just going to ask some stuff around, further things you'd like to hear about or know about, so we can maybe have this conversation again. So hopefully it will be a wonderful experience for all. So first of all, I'm just going to talk a bit about digital platforms and processes and stuff. So when you think about, as Laura was talking about, this kind of link up of digital data and AI, they all kind of work together to make transformation, to make all these systems work. And in order for that to work, you also need the right culture, you need the right confidence, and you need the right kind of capabilities. That kind of people stuff is so core to digital. So for me, digital nowadays is everything, but it's also kind of nothing. It's pretty much in everything you do every day involves digital. So any activity you take largely has a digital element to it. We can't really live without it, I would say, at this point. And when it's best deployed, you're barely really aware of it being there, which is ideally how it should work a lot of the time, because it's just working quietly in the background doing its magic. So in order for digital to work, though, it needs the right foundations. So you need to have clear processes which consider the different scenarios that they need to respond to, and that they're built into how that process works. So one of the biggest challenges that we find in HE is that many of the processes, and I think this will probably ring true for most of you on this call, have been developed over many years. They're deeply idiosyncratic, and they're also at times designed like around people's preferences. Even I'd go as far to say people's egos, around approvals in some cases, and so they're very kind of clunky. And what often happens with these processes is they're moved from manual and they're ported into a system, and then another system, and then another system. And they're never kind of really reviewed to see why those steps are needed and what value they add. So this is something that we see all the time. I know I worked with Melody when I worked at the Royal College of Art. I worked with Melody on putting in a new student management system, and this was something that we really tried to ensure didn't happen by reviewing the processes really carefully end to end to make sure that weren't just porting stuff in. But it is a really hard thing to get right, and it's really hard. It's really hard to kind of manage. But it is key when you're moving to AI, robotic process automation. It's really key that you do this review and that you understand why your processes are working as they are, and why they have the steps that they have, and that they only have the steps that they need to have to work. You also see then in a similar space with platforms, you see the same issue. So many platforms have been hacked about with, they've been, stuff's been added extra, you've maybe ignored certain functionality, you've used certain functionality for something else instead of what it was put in the system to do. You see all of that. And then that makes the system harder to upgrade, harder to maintain, and it makes it harder to use it in a kind of sustainable way. You can't really upgrade it, your tech debt builds up, and it's much harder to change systems should you want to in the future. And this is something, again, we commonly see across the sector. There's a lot better systems out there now, they're a lot more mature. So it's a lot easier if you're adopting a new system now. You tend to see less of this, but it's still very deeply prevalent across the sector. So it's there's something really important about moving to a place where you adopt, not adapt, and how transformative that is. And particularly as you're thinking about AI, it's even more important. You're using the functionality that's built in, that you try to, you don't deviate unless you truly, truly have to. And that can really make this kind of transformation work well. And that applies whether you might be doing a fresh install of a existing system and trying to clean up and reuse it again, or you might be putting in a new system. So it's much better longer term to think about your processes, to think about how you do stuff, to think about your platforms, and get a really stable, sustainable, standard foundation in place to support that. And then the other thing, in terms of digital, I would just touch on is around a people side of digital transformation and some of the challenges there. We need to build within HE the kind of confidence around understanding how digital can help grow systems and streamline services. And this is something that's often assumed that people will just know how to do this. You might be an expert in an estates team or something, and it's assumed that you're going to know how to kind of automate and streamline all your services using digital platforms, which is clearly outside of the remit of your actual skill set and your experience. So there's something about supporting people in that space and them having the confidence to kind of use the tools that are there and available for people. There's also something around thinking about different users and the different needs that they have and the impact that these changes can have on them, and how important is pre-thinking about this towards success. It is human nature to just assume that everyone uses tools in the same way. So there is a kind of bias there around from individuals. All of us do it. I use the internet in a particular way. I'll just quickly directly search for stuff, and I'm always like, why are you meandering around looking at all of that other stuff trying to find it? Just search for it, it's there. But everyone uses it differently, and that's fine. But you need to think about that when thinking about your AI processes, and also when thinking about all of your kind of everything that you do, basically. So this is a space where you find this challenges in leadership teams as well. So I've written papers that have gone to boards, that executive boards, and been told things like, don't talk about the issues, we just need to move on, nobody wants to focus on that. Or, this is really simple, just buy a system, plug it in, it'll work. That kind of stuff just happens all the time. This strategy, it can't take 5 years, you need to do it in a year. People will just get used to it, just get on with it. Or this system just simply doesn't work, just replace it now. Particularly common where something's been hacked about with, and actually the underlying system is really good, but someone has gone in and just made it bad over time without meaning to. And obviously I'm paraphrasing what people have said in exec boards. They said it in a much longer, more verbose way, but that was the spirit of the message that they gave us. So getting decisions in these kind of exec board kind of spaces around this transformation AI space is really challenging. So it's really interesting to think about how you can write papers that tell a clear narrative, that are pitched at the right culture, and that respond to the arguments that people are going to raise before they even happen. It's, for me, I think one of the trickiest areas in transformation, and it is also the bit that I kind of love the most. And it also is the bit where you can make a huge difference. So it's here where things like honesty, collaboration, empathy are kind of your real friends, and they can make transformation stick. And for AI to work, we need to make reasonable, sensible, and thought through decisions about the way forward before kind of just running in and trying to do stuff and assuming it will work. So that's some kind of background around foundations. So as I said at the beginning, digital is everything and it's nothing. And, much of it is about people and the process behind it as well. But I would say that data is truly nothing. Digital is truly nothing without the data that feeds it. And this is now for Laura to talk about. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Emma. And I think just as you were speaking, I was sort of making some notes around that, because data really should be seen as part of the infrastructure in any sort of digital and AI transformation, particularly around AI, because anything that you do is only as good as the data that you've trained it on. And in higher education, particularly, I think that we are data rich. There is data everywhere. We've got data on everything, but we are insight and intelligence poor. And that's not necessarily a capability issue. It's not about the skills of the insight and analytics teams that you've got, the DTS teams, the people who are working with data, but it's actually linked to the issue of, disconnecting systems. How many places do you know that hold more than one version of their org chart? In a system, not in a system, in post-it notes on people's desks. What's your data governance like? How many institutions have actually got good data governance in place? For me, having a data strategy and data governance are foundational parts of any sort of digital and AI progress, because if you have ambition in this space, before any of that ambition can be realized, you need to have really robust answers to the questions of what data have we got, where does it live, who owns it, how accurate is it, can we use it lawfully for this purpose, what's the quality like, and who is there to enforce the quality standards of it. All of that isn't glamorous. It's not going to, persuade an exec board that it's something new and shiny, but actually it is the very foundations of any sort of digital and AI initiative that make sure that you're able to do the right things in the right way, for the right people to make a difference. And one of the things that, you see that there's a lot of opportunity in this space and there's a lot of ambition in this space, because a lot of the work that we're doing with data is kind of ripe for automation. It's ripe for AI processing. And you can see that, if you put some kind of simple, clear processes, you've got your scenarios straight, the things that Emma was saying. There's a real opportunity to actually do some really good predictive modeling, to start thinking about student outcomes, to start thinking about, where do we start putting these things into place that are going to make a difference. But as I kind of said at the beginning, those models are only as good as the data that they are trained on, and the role of the human within those processes cannot be understated. We talk a little bit in our confident data partners work about kind of the role of AI and the opportunities that it has. And there are some real advantages to sort of bringing these together. AI can process volume without fatigue. You can throw a whole load of numbers at it and it can do something with it. It can do things consistently. It can give you a methodology. It can catch quantitative anomalies if things aren't adding up right, and can help with things like scenario planning. But you still need to make sure that you've got that human element. We need to be able to ask the right questions. And I know there was a really interesting conversation that Mick started on LinkedIn a week or so ago about the kind of the similarities between using sort of AI models and coaching. And as with all of these things, knowing what question to ask in the first place of the data, of the system, of the process is hugely important. And we need to think about the kind of ethical considerations that go along with that. We're talking about navigating organizational politics. We're talking about navigating context. We're talking about making defensible judgment calls in areas of uncertainty. And actually, if we don't have all of those foundations in place across our data, that makes these things much trickier to do. And going back to having a clear data strategy that tells us what we're able to do, what's the vision, what are the things that we're going to do, and the data governance, which gives us the roles and the security around that to enable us to do the right things in the right way at the right time with the right levels of quality, is hugely important. I think there's a real dichotomy there between, bringing that powerful workflow together where you're actually utilizing AI to do some of that really heavy lifting, do some of that initial exploration, but you still need that human element to kind of direct inquiry, to validate the outputs of what's coming out and own the conclusions. And I think the approach that I think works for kind of the way that I would approach it, and with kind of data and systems, is really how we explore the data value chain to extract the most value out of this, which is really being clear on what is the question that we're trying to answer, and then building those foundational steps. What's the data that can support us? How do we turn that into insight? How do we turn it into intelligence and turn it into action so that we're actually making a difference? And the things that Emma said about the kind of the role of systems and digital in that is a hugely important part. But without those strong foundations and knowing what it is that we're actually trying to do in the first place, I think we have to be very cautious about how AI it can kind of play that role within sort of data and digital transformation. And I can see Melody's been like joyfully nodding along with everything that I've said, and so I will pass over to you, Melody, to take us on the AI journey.
Thank you very much. Yes, I've got about 100 pages of notes I'm going to try and put into some sort of coherent order, because lots of everything that Emma and Laura have said are really truly the fundamentals before we even think about what AI might do for us, and some of the challenges that we're encountering with it, really. And we've talked about it for a very long time in the sector, digital transformation, digital infrastructure, making sure that our legacies are end of life and moved away, and that we're moving to stacks that are helpful and enable us to then build on top of. And then, as Laura has described, AI is only as good as the data that we have in it. And we've always been like that in the sector. We've only been able to ever work with the data that we have, and we're very data rich, but we're very analytics poor. And now we've sort of embarked on this new revolution around technology and our capabilities, and I think as a sector we probably have some work to do, as Laura's been describing and Emma has been describing, to bring our digital estates up to scratch, to then make sure that our data is clean and usable and reliable and accessible and interoperable, and then we can sort of add this other layer of really exciting technology advancements. I had a couple of questions actually for the audience. So I guess my first one is around, I can see lots of you from different institutions. Who has got an institutional directive to engage with AI as a strategic program or a strategic driver? Hands up. Anybody? I can see some of you have got job titles that have got AI already in it. Okay, not so many of you. Has anybody read their own institutional AI strategy? Do you have an institutional strategy for AI, the use of AI? Yeah, a couple of nods. Okay.
It's
We're starting
interesting.
to embark on it.
Melody, Sandro and I are just doing a piece of work with a university who have got a directive to use AI more. That's what they've been given as their kind of, we need to do more of this. And when we kind of did our sort of pre-meeting with them, these were the questions that Sandro was asking, kind of, what's your institutional policy on AI? And they're like, I don't know that we've got one. We just know we need to do more in this space. So as you can definitely see, there's a vibe out there for people to start doing more, but not knowing where to start, I guess.
Yeah, and that's sort of, that very, very neatly leads me on to because you can use you can use AI or robotics or some variation of those things for so many different elements. So there is that sort of professional, personal use. So I use ChatGPT quite often. It's almost replaced Google for me. So I will now go to ChatGPT and ask it to do those searches, and I won't go to Google as my first port of call. I use it to help me with emails, to make sure that they're neutral, the tone is right, etc., etc. We then have using it as a tool for your actual transformation. So there are lots of tools out there. So if you're undergoing digital transformation, you might utilize an AI tool to actually help you drive that transformation. That might be around identifying places where there are operational efficiencies. It might be using a bit of kit to help you drive some of those process sessions, which used to be sticky notes on walls. So there's lots and lots of ways that we have started to embed using AI to actually help us drive those transformations. So it's not really an output. It's not a let's just use it more as an output. It's actually, let's use it to drive some of those changes. And we're still, Mick and I, we work really closely together. We're still grappling with what that looks like in reality. So you sort of have the personal, professional use, you have it as a driver for transformation, and you also have it as an output of the transformation. So exactly to Laura's point, let's just use AI more. Actually, how and for what purpose? And both Emma and Laura have talked, a lot about needing to understand what you need from it before you go ahead and just do it. Just using it is not really going to give you the things that you need. So is it that you want to have an improved experience for your students or your applicants or your staff? Is that the driver? Is it that actually you want to reduce the number of queries that are coming in because you need to do more with less? And I appreciate we all need to do a bit more with less. Is it that actually, to Laura's point, we want much better analytics so we can do some predictive modelling so we can really understand what's coming? Is it that we want to use it because actually we have a subgroup of students who need particular care and attention in the teaching and learning space? Do we need to put it into our curriculum? There are so many facets to AI, and when we talk about AI strategies, which I guess is the the really, really big picture stuff, sometimes one strategy actually is not quite enough for the number of different ways and the number of different uses that we might have for it going forward. So that's definitely something that when I speak with institutions about using AI, it's about being really clear about, well, which bit of this, these huge institutions that do multiple different things in the operational space, in the teaching and learning space, in the forging education forward space, in the digital transformation space, where are we actually going to embed it and for what purpose? I think that's a real key driver. And then once we've started to think about what that actually looks like and we've got clarity on that, and then it's really about then understanding, okay, well, how do we use it within the guidelines and the parameters and the principles that we want to apply across an institution or an organisation, so it's not just wild out there. And if you think about pure sort of AI implementations, both inside HE but also outside of HE, they often work within a series of different principles depending on what our appetite is. So we might choose, for example, to have citizen developers. I know at TechnologyOne we have a citizen development program. We haven't called it that, but that's what it looks and feels like. It means that each of us have access to a lot of AI tools that we can use and learn and develop and grow with, but within a very, very clearly defined defined set of parameters. So from an institutional perspective, and I've worked with lots of institutions that have said, actually, we don't really want that because we're not comfortable, it's too much, we don't know how to police those sorts of activities once they're out there in the wild. I guess my argument back, and it's a challenge, is that those tools are so readily available out there anyway. People are able to access and will start using those tools, whether we ask them to or not, whether we police them or not. So there is something about parameters and guidelines for those models as well. All the way down to much more restricted. Actually, you've got a centralized AI and automation team. Their job is to specifically go out to the institution, find really good examples where we want to embed AI into the institution. We build it as a centralized team. We own it, we manage it, we become a managed service essentially. So we have all these different facets and all these different mechanisms and ways that we can actually embed and implement AI across an institution. And I do think as a sector we are very young in our journey to be able to embed that. I think historically we're quite slow to manage our own digital estates, and this is very, very fast moving technology and it changes every single day. We see something new, there is something new that it can do. It's very, very powerful, and it really can be quite transformative for both the applicant and the student and the staff experience. But there is a level of governance that I think as a sector we have not necessarily wrapped our hands around. And I appreciate that there were some people in the chat that are like, are a bit skeptical of it, a little bit scared of it, don't really like the idea of it. And I think they are totally valid concerns, but I guess the flip side is that it's probably coming either way. So we can be skeptical, and aware and wary of it, and I think that's very legitimate. But I think then we still need to have those guardrails in place and those the strategic documents in place so that we are using it properly and effectively. And I think actually outward facing for applicants and for students and for new staff members coming on to work at the institution, there is now this expectation that we do have something in place that talks about our plans with AI and RPA tools and those sorts of things. And what are we going to do with it? What's our official stance on it? And that might be not only what are we doing operationally with it, but also what are we doing ethically with it? What are our sustainability practices? Because of course, every time you chat GPT something to make an email sound less angry, some water gets used. So we have a lot of things. As a sector that has been very, very equitable and has spent a lot of time making sure that we are responding to those things. This is the new sort of challenge that I think we also do need to navigate, and I think it's something we'll need to probably grapple with sooner rather than later, because I don't know if your experience has been the same as ours, but certainly my experience over the last 2-3 years has been this has really gained momentum. So we spend a lot of time now. I would say probably 80% of my time is spent talking about AI tools and how we can use them either professionally as transformation embedded into our outputs as well. So yeah, there's a lot there. And I had one last comment, which was around strategic buy-in, which I think was a comment that both Laura and Emma had made. So not only do we have to use AI, or will there be the opportunity to use AI for lots of different types of things within an institution, but actually each stakeholder group will have a different lens through which they will want the outputs of AI. So if you're talking about you've got your executive buy-in, you've taken your paper up to the execs, they're not really going to necessarily care that you've optimized the applicant to the apply to enroll process using a bit of AI to make that process better. But they will be much more interested in that big picture predictive analytics around, okay, well, this is the cohort, and if we look at this historically and we type in some good prompts, we're going to get information about, or accurate information about, what the future might look like for these particular groups or these particular courses, or etc. etc. So they're going to have a very different lens, and they're going to have a much more strategic and probably financial lens as well. So they're going to want to know that their investment into AI is actually going to provide a return of some description. And that sounds brutal for a sector that doesn't really operate on that. We operate in an education space, not in a return on investment space, but AI can be expensive. So there is always this balance between the two things. And that'll be very different from the operational teams on the ground, who will want to use and want to have an output from AI that is completely different. They want their work, you might want your work to be augmented for it to do some of that heavy lifting. Actually, if we're getting 64,000 exceptional circumstances in to a team of 3, maybe I want a tool to take a look at all of those, make decisions on some of them, and leave me with the really difficult ones that I can review, with my brain and with my eyes, and make slightly different decisions. So the outputs look very, very different depending on who it is in the institution who is talking about the use of AI. And I think that adds a layer of complexity, because I think there has been confusion about what we want and who wants what and what is appropriate for each different sort of group to ask for. And I think if you are a transformation or a director or managing those sorts of changes, these are the things that are really helpful to really iron out and make clear right from the off. So you've got very, very clear lines of communication about who is going to need what, and what are their KPIs, what are they expecting from you as an output of using AI within an institution. So that was a very, very, very fast ramble, all in my notes.
That was
Any
amazing.
questions on that?
Yeah, has anyone got any questions? I've turned the mics on so you can ask them with your voices, should you choose to. Or you can stick them in the chat. Has anyone got any questions about that or anything else?
Okay, so we don't have a policy yet.
Sophie, do you want to ask a question?
Do you mind if I come in? Sorry if there's some background noise, but our neighbour's getting their roof done, so it's quite noisy. I was in a meeting last week with group of HR directors, and they were talking about AI. We had a presentation from one of the big four consultancies about AI. And actually, what happened was that the whole conversation around AI got completely derailed into data. So picking up the points that Laura was making earlier, and that all of you have made, they were talking, there were the general things about, well, we're skeptical about AI. We've got groups of people who are very skeptical and this and that. But actually, it came down to we have problems with our data and our systems. They don't talk to each other. We're not confident about the data that we're using. So how are we ever going to make that progress with AI without that? So I just wondered if you had any more thoughts. Like, I don't have an answer for that other than we'll fix all of your data. But as Melody has said, like, AI is gathering pace. We all know that it is. So how do you, I suppose the question is, like, how do you marry those two things? How do you make progress with AI knowing that your data might not be as good as it can be? How do you do those two things together?
Question.
I think it's a great question, Sophie. And I think, the question is really about trust, isn't it? Because historically in higher education, we don't trust our data, and you will spend every university has a team of people whose sole job it is to essentially clean all of your data before you send it to the regulator. And they do it in complicated and intelligent ways, but essentially that's what they're doing, is cleaning everything up. So you've got a great external picture. And I think there's a really interesting difference between this. AI is a kind of big bang transformation. We're not doing it, and now we are doing it, as opposed to kind of an incremental one. And I think if we focus it on the idea of, you're not going to go from where you are to being an all singing, all dancing AI approved institution overnight. But actually thinking as a kind of incremental digital transformation is quite helpful to say, well, actually, what's the data that we need right now to make this decision in this use case, and how do we know if it's any good? And the things that will tell you that are, your data strategy, your data governance framework, which a lot of people don't have, but actually it's becoming more and more foundational. But you don't need all of those things to be in and fully operational to say, well, actually, who's the person who knows this data the best, who can tell me what standard it needs to be, who can tell me that what we want to use it for in this case is the right thing to do and can help us own the outputs. And building some solid use cases in that way, I think, is a really strong way to start bringing trust in the outcome. But you also need to have some sort of champion who can help you make a difference with whatever that outcome is. Because if you're doing something that's amazing, but actually nothing changes as a result of it, you have to ask the question, so what? And it gives you more kind of mileage, I think, to dispel the arguments of, oh, it's because our data's rubbish, that's because our data's this and that and the other. And so, building that kind of end to end from kind of what's the problem we're trying to solve and who's it going to make a difference to and how will we know, gives you the opportunity to kind of do some of that cleansing along the way. The other thing that I would say is that there's an opportunity for institutions to get more comfortable dealing in uncertainty, particularly around data, because our data will never be 100% clean. It never will be. But there's too many people touching it, doing things that they shouldn't. There's too many systems and processes in play for you to be ever 100% confident that the data that you're looking at any given time is 100% accurate. However, that doesn't mean that you can't use it. And actually, Sandro made a post on LinkedIn a while ago about just this, just talking about when is your data kind of good enough. I used to work with somebody whose catchphrase was always, and you'll have heard me say this before, Sophie, I know, but good enough for now, safe enough to experiment, which just means that, it might not be perfect, but it's good enough for what we're trying to do for us to be able to trust the output. And I think a little bit more of that sort of mentality can be quite helpful as we, as Lucy's put in the chat, the speed in which this is happening is phenomenal. And so we actually don't have the luxury of waiting for all of our foundations to be perfect before we crack on.
Yeah, I think that's exactly as you say. There is It is moving. So a couple of comments. It's moving so quickly, the technology, that not that the sector will be left behind, but it is potentially quite it can potentially be quite a transformative bit of kit, and it is just a tool in amongst a much larger, it is not the be all and the end all. It is just a tool out there. But there is something, exactly as Laura describes, about finding that business challenge, that business problem, and stress testing it, and using you could even potentially use the AI to help clean the data to then, so when I talk about using AI for lots of different things, actually AI is not just an output. You can actually use it to help drive some of that change in the first place. So if you have data sets that do need cleaning and you're very clear about the parameters within which it needs cleaning or cleansing, you can actually build relatively simple tools to do some of that work. And actually some of it's not even AI, some of it's just robotics or something, some other workflow that will help you to do that. I think as a sector, we've not been very good at failing fast. So in startup, you implement quickly, you fail fast. If you fail, okay, we put it to one side, we keep going. And I don't think we've been very good at doing that historically, because we're very big machines and we move very slowly. We have lots of committees of decision making points, and it just takes a while to get things going. I think because the technology is moving so quickly, if an institution can get in place a really strong strategy and some really strong principles and parameters, actually there is something about creating safe space so you can do those activities. And again, that comes back to data as well, that comes back to infrastructure, it comes back to enabling these activities to happen. And I guess the last comment, I've written play. These are tools, we're all discovering what they can do almost at the same time, give or take a week probably. We're all just figuring it out. So it would be nice to have people who understand it and want to play with it and want to understand. And institutions, I mean, with a hotbed of learning, we should have lots of people that are very, very keen to go out and explore and play with in a safe context what this could do for us. You can use AI to help you be ready to. Yeah, exactly, Emma. Should put that on a t-shirt, actually. Maybe not. Be very sad t-shirt.
You can see also the structures in HE are starting to adopt things like portfolios of kind of products. They're starting to adopt continuous improvements, that kind of stuff, and all of this supports with AI, because you can just iteratively just try stuff and gradually move over, because trying to do stuff big bang literally just doesn't, it never works. It's just a complete nightmare and generally just results in the worst car crash. So but you're seeing that becoming more embedded, which is really helpful, and it means that AI will hopefully succeed. Anyway, we need to answer more than one question, so Alice, sorry, Alice.
Yeah, hopefully this will be actually a relatively quick one. It might be just simply just use AI to solve it. But I was just wondering, like, partly to do the question about it is moving at such pace, that seems to me to create a gap between what people know AI is and understand it and how we're using it just in our day-to-day lives, and what the potential is. Like, almost we could have been having this webinar a year ago or more, but we're sort of playing catch up. How do we help people understand the potential without them just jumping to conclusions like it's just about how students are faking their essays and that kind of thing? So how do we, write a great strategy around it, but how are they going to write a great strategy around it if they don't know what it's about?
It's a really good question, and it's something that I've worked with quite a lot of institutions to embed, and there is no right or wrong way to do this. But I think Laura sort of describing, well, do more with AI. That's the thing. Go off and do it. Actually, then there is something about the university executive then enabling that to actually happen, and that might mean setting up a centralized group of champions, of experts. You set up a central school of expertise or something that is then the driver for the communications out to the institution. But that's a very active activity that has to have buy-in at an executive level. There has to be a decision there that there is funding and that there is a group that is going to then report into the mechanisms that it needs to report into. But in my experience, that has probably been the most sensible and the most familiar way for institutions to actually start to absorb changes like that. So comms plans that go out to the various departments and functions, pilots that have tangible outputs and outcomes that students and staff can actually see and touch and take a look at and use. That has been a way to start bringing that up. But then, you know, because you're right, the pace of change is so fast, it really is up to that very, very core group of people who may have a director, a couple of BAs. It could be really small, it could be much bigger, it could be devolved. It really is up to them to then drive that conversation out into institutions. And I appreciate that is a big challenge when you've got very big devolved institutions who are doing lots and lots of different things. But keeping up with the pace of change is something that even, you know, tech companies whose jobs it is to keep up with and get ahead of are struggling with in this area. So it's a really good, I don't know if anybody else has got any experience, you know, in their own institutions around how they're managing that conversation and keeping up with and getting ahead of change, AI related.
I've seen stuff on the ground. So I've seen like when I worked in one institution, we had a kind of people could suggest ideas that we could try in the kind of technology enhanced learning space and in some of the other spaces, and we would kind of do not pilots, but we would do kind of experiments for a term and see how it landed with students and things. So there are ways from the ground up, if you've got willingness kind of, you know, in the institution to think, oh, let's try this thing and see if that works. Let's have a go at that. I would say there were probably like about 25% of them were successful, but that's fine because you've had some success, you've got some learning, you've tried some stuff. So there are things you can kind of do. It's not just all about the exec board and stuff. There are things you can kind of do on the ground if you're kind of running a team or running a function. You just think, actually, let's try and automate this. Let's have a look at this and try and improve that. And even that gradual change can make a big difference.
Yeah, we've certainly had experiences where we've had projects where we've gone out to the business functions and said, give us your top 10 pain points, really. And then we've taken a look at them. It's very, very traditional methodology, actually, where you go in, you have a long list of 80 problems, actually 60 of them are just tech, digital workflows not working properly, the report's broken, you know, Barbara's keeping that spreadsheet on her desktop and has locked it down, no one can access it, like that sort of thing. Then you've got 10 things where you're like, actually, this is a cultural problem. But actually there's 10 things that would benefit from some maybe some AI or some automation or some robotics. And of those last 10 things, 5 of them are going to really make a tangible difference. And of those 5, 2 of them are going to be great candidates. So they're the 2 we're going to start with, and they're the ones we're going to go and showcase, because actually on balance, they're going to make the biggest difference to our staff and our students, and it's going to showcase what it can do. So we have also gone, you know, we've also done it as Emma's described, sort of ground up. But again, you know, you still do need that executive,
of course,
sort of buy-in to as a driver and as an unblocker, you know, just to make sure that you're getting some progress.
Yep. Lucy.
Hi. Yeah.
Hiya.
So not necessarily, it is a question, but I guess start again. Yeah. So thanks for that. Really help. It's really interesting. And one thing I kind of wanted to pull out is we've talked a lot about AI, and then automation kind of gets bundled in together. And for me, I think they're massively separate things with separate uses. And then automation, I think, is much more, not much more powerful, but like has a easier sell in higher education, because it is about like removing, it's a bit more tangential. And I've been using Power Automate in my role for about 4 years, now, 3 years, and it's made massive improvements, but it also still, without any proper governance and support around it, has that risk that we all have around single point of failures. And actually, whereas you had Sandra hosting the spreadsheet on her desktop, now you've got Lucy, who owns all of the Power Automate flows, and if any of them go wrong, or if she doesn't log into a computer for a month because, you know, she dared to have a child and nobody picked up the work, it's definitely not a real example, you know, but imagine imagine, you know,
you win the lottery, Lucy, and you're like, I'm off, see you later.
Well, I don't know if I'd call
working.
First month of maternity leave the lottery, but there we go. But I guess it's highlighting the importance for support around
yes,
that kind of transferability across institutions, because as soon as everyone picks it up and goes, oh, that's going to save us loads of time, and you've got individuals just picking it up but without any kind of coordinated process. And for my institution, our IT department will say, no, we're not supporting it. If you want to do it, that's up to you, but we're not touching it. But then it's that real difficulty of how do we move from, so I guess just any thoughts around how do you move from that, great, someone's had a play and come up with this really easy, like this really neat thing, and turning it into, God forbid, it's a project where we've got to do 85,000 project management documents to get buy-in from an exec, and it needs 60 different committees to agree to it. How do you move from one to the other, I guess?
It's a really good question. I don't have the answer to it. Maybe
I was just going to to empathise. So I have a very comparable experience, Lucy, from the very institution that you are talking from.
Shocking.
But it's actually when we did the very first HESA in Ultrix project at Nottingham. So transforming the way we did statutory returns using Ultrix to do all of the kind of data collation, data cleansing and output. It took me 18 months to go through the governance structure to get permission to do the project, and it took 5.5 months to actually do the work. And I think that's the it's the real challenge and tension of what we're dealing with, especially in the world. And this was in a place where at the time we were told that we couldn't use a particular bit of software because it wasn't in the data strategy, and we asked what was in the data strategy. They're like, oh, we haven't written that yet. Okay, great. So that's that's the kind of context that we're living in. But actually, I think part of that, and it does go back to some of these foundational things, because institutions are always kind of looking for that sort of alignment with what they've already got, and being able to find the kind of, okay, well, who's the person within this data framework or this governance framework who can become the champion and enable us a path through, which is why I think Emma started off by saying half of these problems are culture rather than anything else. And but particularly, I think within the data and digital world, and with this, it's having somebody who, even if it's just for part of what you're doing, is convinced by the opportunity and the argument, but having a really clear benefits case of where those benefits come, because half the time the benefits come at an organizational level, but the burden lies at an individual level. And I think this is where we have the opportunity to bridge that gap, to say, actually, when we go into the world of AI and automation, quite often the benefits are also at an individual level, because you're taking time that people have to spend doing, let's be honest, really dull stuff, and they don't get to do the cool stuff. And actually, I think building that benefits case and finding someone who can help you champion that across the different parts that you're talking about is one of the ways in which you can do that and make it powerful.
Yeah, I think in my experience, IT departments and functions are probably not the best place for these initiatives to sit anyway. So business functional unit, but again, as Laura has described, that sort of ecosystem of champions, people who are going to talk about the benefits for you when you're not in the room. And I mean, your comment about you owning the Power Automate automations, and then if you're not there and it doesn't run, like half the function ceases to function, and you're like, well, I don't know how to fix it. I mean, there is something there about making sure there's governance and there's planning in place to manage that, and that becomes a centralized thing and not a singular point of failure. And it is one of those. Slightly more tricky. It's slightly more tricky to navigate. And I also wanted to make a comment around, because you're quite right, Lucy, using Power Automate and robotics is very different from some of the AI elements, and I think there is an education piece here as well. Most of us in the room, some of us in the room will recognise the difference between the two. Also, because we use those terms interchangeably, AI has just become the catch-all for anything. But actually, like you said, the most benefit I've seen in institutions has really been around robotics and automation. It's been about taking data, making decisions, presenting those decisions back for a human to make the final decision. You know, it's taking the heavy lifting and presenting it back. Now, if we wanted to move really truly into the realms of AI and start having agents and just starting using prompts like we do with ChatGPT, that's a very, very different prospect. And, you know, Laura's talked about data. Data for robotics is one thing, because we can build lots of exceptions and rules in, and we can say if this data doesn't absolutely meet this criteria, exit it out, and we'll put it in an exceptions report and we'll manually do it. When you get into the realms of AI, where you're asking it a question and it's going off and seeking that information and providing you with an answer, that's actually where you need your data to be almost, you know, in pretty good nick. Not absolutely perfect, because you still have those guardrails in place, but there are different layers and levels. But certainly robotics has been a very, very is a good entry point actually also into using AI and automation with an institution, because you can very tangibly see the benefits. We do a lot in the admission space with robotics. So, you know, it does a sift through applications, it looks at those applications, it makes a decision about which ones it thinks on balance are your best bet for offer making, because they meet all the criteria immediately. So it's doing that work, presenting it to you, you can make a decision and go on ahead. So you can see that just that very broad, tiny example just would save a lot of time, of which I think we're running out of. Is that right?
It's fine. We're all right. I'm keeping an eye on it. Yes, so I think we have probably run out of time for questions. One thing I was going to ask at the end, though, is a last kind of call to action for everyone. If that I mean, I've really enjoyed this conversation. I think hopefully, you know, people seem to have. If there's anything, we would be happy to do another one. If there's a particular topic that people would like us to cover in this space, you know, whether it's more around, you know, the stuff that Melody was talking around, the difference between AI automation, all the kind of differences of that kind of side. If it's more about kind of actual tangible, how do you adopt, where could you adopt, where would you get both benefit? Anything you think of, just stick it in the chat or reach out.
Yeah.
We've developed a preparing for kind of AI and automation toolkit, which we're going to publish next week. So we'll email that round to all the people that signed up to this, and hopefully that's useful. And yes, Laura Weatherall stuck a load of links in the chat there for useful content, hopefully. And so I think, yeah, that about wraps it up. So thank you so much for coming. We really appreciate all of your time. We hope it was useful, and it was lovely to see you all. And yeah, so thank you from all of us to all of you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
See you guys.
Thank you.
See you soon. Bye. 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 Bye.